I'm Andrew. I lead this nursery project. It's a levy-funded project. However, John is running the webinar today because he's the expert on Liriomyza Leafminers in Australia. Next
Don't know
slide,
about that. So Leafminers, Liriomyza Leafminers, I just thought I'd highlight a range of leaf miners. Not every leaf miner you're going to come across is going to be a Liriomyza or a fly leaf miner. The top three are actually moths. So you've got your citrus leaf miner, which is a little moth, same as your potato tuber moth, and the sweet potato leaf miner, which is again is another moth which will mine inside the leaf. You do have beetles also that mine leaves, such as the one in Lantana leaf miner. You have leaf miner midges, which I think is a gall midge affecting wattles. And then not all leaf miner flies are Liriomyzas. The Cineraria leaf miner is a different genus altogether, but they do look very similar. So it's just an indication of just because you have a leaf miner, it doesn't mean it's a fly. It could be a moth, could be a beetle, or even a midge. So, okay. So Liriomyzas, this is part of two projects which I'm only involved in the second one, the MT20005, looking at serpentine leaf miner. But this started back in 2008, where vegetable leaf miner entered the country and the Cape. And it wasn't until 2015-16 that a project was developed to look at the impact this particular leaf miner might have on our industries, whether it be vegetable, nursery, or whatever. And then 2020, serpentine leaf miner came in right at the end of this project. They had done some work early on to look at the impact serpentine leaf miner might have on our industries. And it just so happens that was available basically as soon as the serpentine leaf miner reared its ugly head, starting off in Western Sydney, making its way up to Queensland, we feel in vegetable seedlings. And it wasn't until last year, again up in North Australia, where the American serpentine leaf miner, so a different Liriomyza, was found both in the Cape, Northern Territory around Darwin and Katherine, and in Kununurra. All three can cause significant damage to various crops, and I'll talk about that shortly. And it's only just recently that our serpentine leaf miner, the one that I'm predominantly working on here, has found its way into Victoria. Queensland is fortunate in the fact that we have a biosecurity barrier up in North Queensland, and we feel that is the reason the vegetable leaf miner hasn't relocated itself from up north down to southern parts of Australia. That barrier basically prohibits the movement of plant material from the north down south. And hopefully that will be the same with American serpentine leaf miner from Queensland's point of view. But even though it's in WA and Northern Territory, there is also possibilities that we will get that particular species coming across from those locations. They all look very similar. Small, black and yellow flies. You can see as a comparison with a 5-cent piece how large they are, 1 to 2 millimeters in size. The top three or top four are the ones that are now in Australia. The cabbage leaf miner is an endemic one anyway. It's been here for a long time. But the bottom two are just itching to get their foothold into Australia. I think a trifecta is far better than having all 5 of them in Australia. So let's hope those other 2 stay out. Yeah, so all I'm trying to get at here with this slide is that just because you've got a small black and yellow fly doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a particular leaf miner. It is very difficult to diagnose when you actually look at them physically. you really need to do molecular work on them in order to distinguish which species you have. So just a quick indication of life cycle, and this is for all 3 Liriomyzas, the exotic ones that have come in recently. They start off with an egg, have 3 larval stages, pupate, and then the adult. They oviposit inside the leaf. So you can see these lesions here. This is where they oviposit, and they'll lay an egg in there, but they don't always lay eggs. But predominantly they do, or probably maybe less than 10% of the time they do. You get a larvae developing, and don't know why that's not working. And that's not working either. Oh, there we go. Once the larvae has matured, it'll eat its way out of the leaf. Pupate, it generally falls onto the ground to pupate, but sometimes it'll actually pupate on the plant. So people are really good at distributing this pest because they do pupate on the plant, and even in potting mix, if your plant has leaf miners, they will fall into the potting mix, and you actually move it from place to place. So the main source of movement is people. It's not a very strong flyer. First sign of damage is the stippling. So this is all the feeding sites. Every now and then you will get an egg that I've marked in red. And like I said, that's usually less than 10% of the time that I've observed. But most of the time, as you look at this fly here, she'll put her ovipositor into the leaf. She'll mash it up really, really well. And eventually, if she doesn't lay an egg, she'll actually feed on the exudate coming out of that leaf. And that's how they feed themselves, the adults. They're very good at it. So all those spots you see on all these leaves, most of them are actually feeding sites. Maybe just wait a couple of more seconds. Hopefully she'll move that ovipositor and you can see how she feeds. There we go. So she just sucks that juices that are coming out of the leaf. So if you see these dimpling or the spotting on the leaves, they'll always have a hole towards one end, and that's where they put the ovipositor in to do the damage. Oops. Sorry. Leaf mines themselves, they can be a little bit misleading if you don't know what you've got. Serpentine leaf miner, the one that I work on, are fairly detailed, intensive mines. The American serpentine leaf miner, from what I've seen, are not quite as serpentine in nature. They're more compact. Even the vegetable leaf miner is very detailed, the one in the basil. As I said before, they have a large host range, over 200 hosts and at least 15 families, if not more. This list, we haven't yet seen it in maize or in the grasses, the Poaceae family, but we have seen it in basically everything else. And depending on which one you have, will also tell you which host they're going to be preferencing. Serpentine leaf miner love leafy vegetables. We've seen it in tomatoes, possibly some cut flowers, but that's yet to be confirmed. American serpentine leaf miner like your daisy type plants, your solanaceous plants. And I don't know enough about the vegetable leaf miner. I haven't dealt with that one much at all, so sorry about that. But the other interesting thing is they love weed hosts. So if you've got a lot of weeds in your nursery, check them out because they could be harboring leaf miners. Now, there are a lot of native leaf miners in Australia as well. So don't just think you might have one of these Liriomyzas. You could have one of many different genera of leaf miners. And just because you've got leaf miners doesn't mean to say you're going to have a problem either. As I'll talk later, they're also a good host of beneficial insects. And they're the key to keeping this pest or these pests in check. Some of the work that we've been doing is looking at distribution of these 3 leaf miners, Liriomyzas, around Australia as part of our project. And as you can see, where the darker the greens, the longer it's going to be in that location. The vegetable leaf miner and the American serpentine leaf miner, they do prefer hot tropical conditions, where the serpentine leaf miner is more going to be down in the temperate areas of Australia. As an example, your vegetable and leaf mining and American serpentine leaf miner, they can withstand up to 40 degrees Celsius temperatures, where your serpentine leaf miner, that starts dying off between 30 and 32. So when we had it here 2 years ago, we had that really hot summer, and it seemed to disappear from where we actually found it first in Queensland. And it's only now that it started to come back in large numbers. And some of these can withstand, like the vegetable leaf miner, or the serpentine leaf miner, sorry, the pupae can withstand -11. So they can overwinter quite readily, and even over summer. And as part of our project, we did also look at a couple of potential parasitoids, just where they may be present at different times of the year in Australia. And you can see that these 2 are ones which we're commonly finding in Australia. They should be out there in the environment helping control your pests most of the time. And I do like this image. This is one that Andrew took. You got your little parasitoid larvae consuming a serpentine leaf miner larvae. So what impact are these going to have on your business? They disrupt photosynthesis. The stippling can allow secondary infections to set in, as you can see in the bean image. Excessive mining can actually stunt and even kill seedlings in particular. So your young plants are the most susceptible. You lose marketability because you just can't sell them, they're unattractive. It can be costly pest management. If you repeatedly apply pesticides, you're going to have more and more problems. These critters overseas have been known to show resistance to a number of products, especially your synthetic pyrethroids and your organophosphates. And there is another project that New South Wales are conducting, just looking at what chemicals they have got resistance to or what they brought into the country. So we've got any questions up to this stage, Andrew?
Yes, John, we've got a couple. The first is about all those host plants, how there are many host plants recorded, but we haven't necessarily seen them all in Australia. Is there evidence of, let's say, cryptic species where there are species maybe that are overseas that are more adapted to particular host plants, and that's why we're not seeing them in Australia?
I think one of the reasons we've got such a huge host list is also when researchers look at what plants are susceptible to leaf miner activity, they don't give them much choice when it comes to feeding. So they might put them into a cage, put a heap of flies in, and just observe what plants are attacked. So if they don't have a preference as to feed plants to feed on, they'll probably start attacking whatever's there. And I had that my own instance in the lab where I just put 5 different seedlings or vegetable crops in. 1 or 2 were really preferred and they attacked that more than the other ones. But if I just put in 1 at a time, sure, I would get them to attack it. And I think that's why there's such a huge host list. And we're finding that some of those crops on there, especially for serpentine leaf miner that I'm working on, they're just not, they don't like them. They don't prefer them. Like your cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, serpentine leaf miner doesn't like it. I think it's something to do with the taste. But there is a cabbage leaf miner that will attack it. So yeah, I think it depends on what's currently available for them to choose, pick and choose.
Okay, 2 more questions. The next one is, what depth in the potting media or soil do the pupae pupate?
That image I showed you was actually directly underneath plant material. So if you've got leaves that are falling onto your pot, which have had leaf miners on them, they'll just basically pupate on the top of the surface, top of the potting mix. They don't have to go in very far. I've never seen them actually bury themselves into the soil. They just seem to, if there's something on top of them, they'll just pupate there.
Okay. All right, cool. That's a good management action then, just to remove organic matter, and that will help with the cultural control.
Yep, absolutely.
So then the last question, which I may take the liberty of answering myself, is how do you recommend identifying leaf miners, given that there are natives and ones that are exotic or not known to be present in Australia? So how do we identify them? Yeah, go ahead, John.
I think knowing what crops you continually get attacked will help you to some degree. For instance, the American serpentine leaf miner, like I said, they like your daisy type plants, your solanaceous crops. Serpentine leaf miner seems to like your leafy type plants, like your spinach, celery, silver beet. I'm not sure about the vegetable leaf miner, but just knowing what you and just watching what crops are being attacked can help you. It's not an easy task, but I think it's down to molecular. They all look the same, Andrew. Small, black with a yellow dot on their back. Yeah.
So on that note, I manage the diagnostic lab Grow Help Australia, which with this same nursery project under which these webinars are funded, also provides 6 free diagnostic samples per year to all production nurseries. So you can take advantage of that. We've got a method to find, basically we have to find the leaf miner. So if you send us plant material with leaf mines, we can then dissect the leaf mines, pull out the larvae, grind up the organism, extract the DNA, sequence that DNA, and most of the time we get a species identification. So far, we haven't had a leaf mine that hasn't provided a species level identification. So you can do that, and that will be included in your free service.
And I know as part of the project I work with, they are developing what they call eDNA, where they can extract, or they're looking at extracting remnant DNA from the leaf mine. So hopefully in the future, that sort of technology will become readily available so that more labs can actually use it. So you don't actually have to have this pest, the larvae or the fly. You just need the DNA residue that they leave behind and test the leaf mine itself, which is good.
Yeah,
certainly saves trying to hunt down the leaf miner. Okay, so some of the fundamentals of an IPM approach. A lot of this has been developed overseas, but we are hoping to incorporate that in our system, whether it be in farming systems or in the nursery system. One of the things we're trying to look at is economic thresholds. so that you can reduce the number of sprays you put on your crops. Because not only do you kill off your pest, especially the fly, the adult, not so much the larvae which is inside the leaf, but you also kill off those good guys, your parasitoids, which are helping you control this pest. Now, Green Life Industry Australia have put this wonderful pest management plan together. So get hold of the, I wonder if this will work for us, Andrew. I forgot to leave it up last time, sorry. Yep, there we go. They put together this pest management plan on particularly serpentine leaf miner, but it does have relevance to both the American serpentine leaf miner and vegetable leaf miner. The management practices are identical regardless of which species you're actually looking at. So I encourage you to have a look at it, download it, read it, and you can adapt it to suit your own situation. It's not a sort of recipe you have to religiously follow. Use what you can out of it for your own nursery. And if you have any issues, by all means, contact somebody and get them to help you sort things out. All right. Monitoring. Andrew and I have been talking about monitoring over a number of years in workshops and webinars. It's the key to any understanding of what pests and beneficials you actually have out there. You can look at the amount of stippling on your leaves, which are your feeding sites and oviposit sites, the number of mines, so counting the larvae within the leaf. I find that difficult at times, especially for the really small larvae. I'm really good at the third instar larvae, or the last stage before it pupates, but I do struggle with the other ones. A good microscope would be very handy in that situation, where you can dissect the leaf apart and see what larvae are there. Monitoring for the pupae. Overseas, they were developing what they call a pupal tray. You just put that underneath your plant or your bench. As the larvae emerge from the leaf, a percentage of them will fall and pupate either in the soil or underneath your bench in some cases. And by counting the number will give you an indicator of how many or how bad the population might or might not be. You can then collect those pupae, because some of the parasitoids, which I'll talk about later, actually come out of the pupae. So you may have activity in the leaf and the larvae, leaf miner is munching away and it happily pupates, but you don't actually get a fly emerging from it, you get a parasitoid. So if you do look at a pupal tray, keep the pupae that you find and just see what comes out of them. Yellow sticky traps. So this one here is half of what they call a vortex sticky trap. You get another one and it joins up along this slit. Believe it or not, all these black dots are serpentine leaf miner. This is actually in a potato crop, believe it or not, which was heavily infested with leaf miners. Collect leaves, even your weeds. This is an example of what we do to look at activity within a leaf. We just put them in a plastic sealable bag with some paper toweling to help mitigate build-up of moisture. You can change that every now and then. After a few days, if there is activity in there, you'll see the pupae developing, and after a week, you'll see flies coming out, and after 2 or more weeks, you might see parasitoids. So it's just a simple way of monitoring for yourself, or your agronomist does for you. Just collecting leaves, stick them in a sealable plastic bag, and just see what comes out. Not all leaf mines are active. So a lot of these brown ones that you see here, they're old, dead ones. The fly's been and done the damage. It's these little new narrow ones which are probably more active. You'll never get rid of your leaf mine, so don't expect if you control all your leaf miner flies, that you're going to get back to normal. You're always going to have that damage on the leaf. We found predominantly the older leaves are attacked first rather than the younger ones, so you could easily pluck them off, discard them, bin them, cook them, put them in a plastic bag and stick them in the sun, cook them. But put some in a plastic bag and just see what comes out. We are looking at thresholds as a monitoring tool. Some crops, especially vegetable crops, are going to be very difficult because they're selling the leaf. In a nursery situation, you can easily pull off those affected leaves and you'll still have a reasonably high quality plant. Unless you're selling seedlings, and then that could be a bit more of an issue. Looking for signs of activity. So here you got your nice healthy larvae compared to one which has been parasitized. Either parasitized in some way. As I mentioned, the fly adult will feed on the leaves. Also, the adult parasitoid can directly feed on the larvae. So some of them will actually puncture the larvae and feed off the juices, just like a fly feeds off the juices from a leaf. So in this case, that may be what happened there, or the parasitoid has actually paralyzed the larvae and laid an egg either on or inside it. And this is just an example of what you might find on the leaf. So here's your parasitoid larvae. That's the remains of the leaf miner. And this is the pupae inside the leaf. Not all are the same, but this is a specific type of parasitoid pupae. And there's
John,
your, again, yep.
Is that leaf held up to the light so that you can sort of see it more easily?
Yes, it is. Some leaves, because they're so dark, it's easier if you hold them up to the sun or a bright light, and you can actually see the larvae and the pupae and stuff inside them. It's, I guess, just having that backlight just makes it so much easier. Like the one over here this is a spinach leaf, you can quite easily see the larvae. And even here, where it's all gone brown, but sometimes the backlight does help. So just be mindful of that if you're checking for them. If you've got a light box, it'd be great, or just a bright desk light. And like I said, this bottom one is, you've got your little parasitoid larvae consuming a larger one. Weed hosts, there are a lot out there, so I'm just going to go through a few that we've got that we found. So you've got your marshmallow weed, chickweed is becoming a more popular one. Bindweed, they do seem to like that, that we found. Dead nettle and stinging nettle. The stinging nettle is only a recent find. We've had a lot of crops with leaf miners, and stinging nettles don't seem to be preferred, but they just recently started taking a preference to it. Milk thistle. There is a native leaf miner that does attack milk thistle, but also serpentine leaf miner will attack it as well. So that's one of the preferred hosts. Thorn apples. You can see all the stippling on the leaves. All these feeding sites are just hundreds of them, yet there's only one leaf mine. So they may like it as a food source, but they don't mine it. Or if they lay eggs, the larvae just don't develop. So whether that's something to do with the chemistry of the plant, who knows? Fat hen is another one. You get a lot of feeding sites, but not very many mines. Fleabane. Now this is one which is a native leaf miner in Australia, and it produces that blotching type pattern rather than an actual mine. Same with plantain, common plantain. We haven't got serpentine leaf miner out of it yet, this is due to another common leaf mine, a native leaf miner that we have in Australia. And wild choco or kapok, again, a native leaf miner. We've only found it once, actually in my home garden, so I have to go hunting again come the change in weather, just so we can get more samples to see whether we can actually properly identify it. So there's a lot of native leaf miners out there, as well as these exotic ones which we're working with. And having all these native leaf miners also give us the opportunity to look at how many parasitoids or beneficial insects are actually out there controlling these leaf miners throughout the year. So this is something that we're looking at, and the weed hosts are a great reservoir of your parasitoids. Now this is just one example. This is actually a vegetable leaf miner, and this is one of the more common ones which you're finding. This is a female. You see those little white tips on her antennae? That's the distinguishing feature of that particular genus and species. And I'll show you what the male looks like in a minute. The antennae are quite different. Like here, there we go. So that's the male of this female. So your parasitoids, there are basically two types. You have your idiobionts or your kinobionts, but that's a bit of a mouthful. So let's just call them larval parasitoids and pupal parasitoids. So your larval parasitoids, they will actually lay the eggs on or inside the larvae. So they'll paralyze the larvae so it doesn't feed anymore. Instead, the parasitoid starts consuming the leaf miner larvae. And instead of a fly coming out of the mine, you have a parasitoid emerging. Whereas the pupal ones, they'll again lay the eggs on or in the larvae, especially the larger larvae. The larvae will continue mining the leaf. Once it chews its way out to pupate, that egg then germinates or hatches and consumes the developing fly inside the pupa. So it stops that next generation, but it won't stop the larvae from causing more damage on the leaf. But we have found one in some of the survey work that we've been doing that has at least 40% parasitism of the pupae, and we're hoping that would be a good candidate for mass production, so you can actually release it either in the field or in protected cropping situations. And you can see just how small they are. So this is a thumbtack, and there's your little parasitoid on top. There are over 50 different types of parasitoids recorded from Australia, and these are just a few. As an entomologist, I think they're absolutely beautiful. So I apologize if calling an insect attractive is offensive to some people, but they are wonderful looking parasitoids, and these are your good guys. But they do range in size and color and abundance depending on where you are and what time of the year. And these ones here, what you got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've actually found in Southeast Queensland, we've actually found over 10 so far as part of our project. But some of these other ones we have also got, but they're also from other locations. So the key to a really good IPM program is manage the use of your broad spectrum insecticides, i.e. don't use them. Target the leaf miner with an appropriate chemical so that you're not destroying your beneficial insects. Because if you keep destroying your beneficial insects, you are going to have more of a problem. This These images were part of a trial overseas. This image was not sprayed. You can see there's just a few leaf miners on this plant. With this one, they repeatedly sprayed it with OP, I think it was synthetic pyrethroids and an OP. Because they're contact, you will kill the adults. They don't, some chemicals won't actually get into the leaf to kill off the larvae. So unless it's been parasitized, it'll emerge as a fly. You'll get less and less parasitoids being present in those locations that are constantly sprayed. And so you get more flies, laying more eggs, causing more mines, and so you spray more, and it's the vicious cycle. If left unchecked, they're really a secondary pest. It's just because we use a lot of chemistries that we actually damage the biological equilibrium, I guess you can say. You're killing off all the good guys. And leaf miners, especially the three that I'm talking about, they do have some resistance already developing to the various products, especially your SPs and OPs. As part of the previous project on vegetable leaf miners, they looked at how disruptive the various products were to your beneficial insects, namely your parasitoids. And as you can see, a lot of them, basically all of them, have contact action, so they will actually kill off the adults. They either have systemic or translaminar abilities, not all of them, but most of them. So they'll actually penetrate the leaf, hopefully killing off the larvae in the process. Some are better at it than others. I have seen some growers using abamectin on its own, and they still get flies coming out. So coverage could be an issue because it is a translaminar product. I know in the nursery industry, they're looking at a mixture of both azadirachtin and abamectin and getting very good results with that. So if you are wanting to use a product, look at something that's least disruptive to your beneficial insects. Your group 28, your cyantroniloprol and your chlorantroniloprol, even your azadirachtin, they're all relatively soft on beneficial insects. The ones with the asterisks are the ones that have permits for use in the nursery situation. Some of these products are for field crops as well. So there's a whole range of products there that can be used. I'll just quickly click on this, the farm management, nursery production farm management site. And that gives you a list of what permits are currently available. Now, we did leaf miners, Andrew?
That's right. Or without the S, I think.
Oh, leaf miner, yeah. That's it. So out of the 67 were up there originally of permits for the nursery industry, only 7 are available for use against leaf miner. And it just gives you an idea what products you can legally use in the nursery industry. You can also access the same information through the APVMA website. And that gives you a list of, let's do Diptex, which is an insect growth regulator. And that'll tell you what crops, non-food crops, you can use it on. So in a nursery situation, anything that's not a vegetable seedling, you can use it on in non-bearing fruit trees. And it tells you the rates, how to apply it, and so forth. APVMA website is another good source for looking at what permits are available and just basically what other chemicals you can use. If a lot of your products that you use for caterpillars could also have an effect on your leaf miners. So if you've got caterpillar issues, be selective in what you choose. Don't go for the heavy guns to start with. Use a soft product, and that will help save your beneficial insects for your leaf miners. And as I said, leaf miners generally are only a secondary pest. It's just when we use products all the time, especially those that are disruptive to your IPM system, that then leaf miners become a problem.
John,
Yep.
I just want to interrupt if you don't mind. The Australian Plant Production Standard website, which has the address of Nursery Production FMS, that is an awesome site. It has a massive amount of industry resources for fact sheets and management plans on a lot of different pests and diseases, as well as other topics such as water management, growing media management, just to name a few. The search button, the search function actually works. So if you go up to the top right-hand corner of the website and you do a search for whatever it happens to be that you're interested in, a number of different resources that are available to you will come up. So make use of that. It's not just for the minor use permits, but yeah, it's a great resource. So take advantage of that.
Yep, absolutely.
And just on the topic of pesticides, we've had a question come up, John. Are any of the pest oil type products effective at all on these leaf miners, on the Liriomyza Leafminers?
Overseas, they were looking at rosemary oil as a means of a feeding deterrent. It's possible that some of them might have a deterrent ability, so stop the adults from feeding on the leaves, and therefore it will stop them from ovipositing as well. And I've only just recently been given a couple of articles to read on that specific topic, believe it or not. It's something I would like to look at because there is another feeding deterrent or repellent product currently out there which would be nice to look at its effectiveness. The oils themselves, I know eco oil is made up of different botanical oils, I think it's got citronella in it as well, and I'm not sure. They may have some effect. I just don't know. We haven't done the work in that area. I'm hopeful that we can do follow-on work or follow-on project looking at these types of products just to see if they have any effect on stopping the flies from feeding, and if they stop them from feeding, then they'll stop them from ovipositing, I hope. So yeah, short answer is I don't know. You could try it and see how it works. So just in finishing, just showing the same image again, and I've added the serpentine leaf miner bean image in there, considering that's the one I'm working on mostly at the moment. But just because you have leaf miners, it doesn't mean to say you're going to have a fly. You can have a moth, beetle, midge, or a fly causing the symptoms. If you do have issues with leaf miners, as Andrew mentioned previously, there is a free diagnostic service as part of this project where you can send samples in to get identified to species or to genus and species, hopefully, if there's enough material there to work with. And I think that's it. So thanks everyone for attending. If there's any other questions, Andrew?